The 1914 French legislative election took place on the 26th of April and 10th of May 1914 to elect 602 deputies to the French National Assembly. Prime Minister Briand only lasted in office until early 1911, mostly following in the footsteps of his predecessor. The most meaningful change that would occur with him in power would be his Independent Socialist Party changing its name to the Republican Socialist Party. Damn, that sure isn't confusing. Following his resignation, the position of chief executive would pass to Ernest Moniz, who had previously served as Minister of Justice during the Waldeck-Rousseau administration. Over the previous 12 years, French governments had been very stable, the most stable in history of a republic up to that point in fact. Every single government since Waldeck-Rousseau had lasted for at least a year, except for those that took power in an election year. But Moniz would break this streak, as he would only last 3 months in office, until June 1911. In power, Moniz would have to deal with the opening stages of the Agadir crisis against Germany. In 1911, France would force the Moroccan Sultan to sign a treaty that prevented him from signing other treaties without French approval, which Germany under Kaiser Wilhelm II felt went against an agreement made 6 years prior during the First Moroccan Crisis, when France agreed to uphold Germany's economic interests in the country. A revolt would soon break out in Morocco against the Sultan, and France would send 20,000 troops to help crush the revolt. Fearing France would use the troops to fully conquer the country, Germany would send a gunboat and would dock it in the Agadir port, nearly causing an international crisis. Tensions would soon be resolved by the new Prime Minister, Joseph Caillaux. Caillaux was known as a bit of a Germanophile and a pacifist, and thus Germany was happy to negotiate with him. As agreed upon, the Germans would withdraw from and leave Morocco to France, in exchange for France ceding some land to Germany in Central Africa. The accord made its way through the House of Deputies pretty easily, but it faced big hurdles in the Senate. On the surface, these came from senators opposing the accord on the basis of it being a surrender, but the opposition largely came from revelations of bribery going on within the administration, something Caillaux denied profusely. These accusations got serious to the point that Caillaux's government would collapse in January 1912 before the accord was even ratified. He would be succeeded by Raymond Poincaré, who had held his first ministerial position nearly 20 years prior, and he would successfully ratify the accord. Unlike his two radical predecessors, Poincaré was from the Democratic Alliance Party, and his government signified a shift to the right, as he filled many positions with fellow members of the Democratic Alliance, although left-wingers like Alexandre Millerand, Léon Bourgeois, and Briand would still be given high-ranking positions. Besides the German issue, Poincaré would work to strengthen France's alliances, as war seemed to draw near. He would work for diplomatic rapprochement with the United Kingdom, and would visit Moscow to strengthen the Franco-Russian alliance, where he would learn more in depth about Russia's ties with Balkan powers like Serbia. Poincaré brought back stability, and his government would last just over a year. He would be forced to leave office, however, after he successfully won the 1913 French presidential election. Now the president, Poincaré would appoint back Aristide Briand, who had supported him in the presidential election, back to the prime ministership. He, however, only lasted 2 more months in office, before his government lost a vote on a major law proposal, prompting him to resign. This law proposal was one that would raise the mandatory period of military service for able-bodied Frenchmen from 2 years to 3. The rising tensions in Europe had encouraged the French political elites to try to bolster their forces. France may have come out of the Agadir crisis in peace, but it had still scarred the nation. Measures would be implemented, such as a dramatic rise to the military budget to equal Germany, but this law would be the most controversial. This law was intended to increase France's preparedness in the case a war broke out, which year by year became a likelier and likelier possibility. The law had the support of the entire government, but it wasn't without its critics. The loudest opposition came from none other than socialist leader Jean Jaurès. Jaurès' opposition came from a socialist tradition, which argued against workers going to war with one another, seeing the true division as being between labor and capital. Jaurès would give fiery speeches against the law on the floor of the House and would lead many protests with his supporters against the law. Jaurès proposed that instead of increasing the period of mandatory military service, the French army should be radically restructured to instead be composed from the bottom up of citizen militias, just like the Greek armies of old. This proposal garnered little support, but Jaurès successfully whipped up large opposition to the bill, both with the French people and within Parliament. Still then, the fear of war was too strong to overcome. The new Prime Minister, Louis Barthou, would successfully get the law through the House by a vote of 358 to 204, although 2/3 of the radical parliamentarians opposed the bill, even when the party's leader supported it. Support from the Republican Federation and Liberal Action on the right of the House was critical for its passage. The bill would next be brought to the Senate, where the newly broken out Second Balkan War would lead to it being passed overwhelmingly. Last-minute amendments were proposed that would have moderated the bill, but all such proposals were rejected. Barthou would only last in office until December, when he was outvoted on the measure of pension immunity. His successor would be Gaston Doumergue, a man who had risen over the years to become one of the most prominent members of the Radical Party. He would lead one of the first administrations in a while to make strides towards societal reform, when early on he proposed to implement an income tax. But the government would be brought to a halt as the one bringing the bill to Parliament, Joseph Caillaux, who was now back as finance minister, was forced to resign. This was due to Gaston Calmette, a major French newspaper editor, being assassinated by Caillaux's wife, Henriette Caillaux, over a propaganda campaign he had launched against her husband. She would be tried and found guilty of murder, and the scandal would force Caillaux out of the cabinet, preventing him from presenting the income tax bill to Parliament. This scandal served as a shocking kickoff to the election campaign, where foreign policy took center stage in a way it never had before. The 3-year law and a potential war with Germany was the issue of the day, with the different positions taken by the parties being the main debate. The SFIO and Jaurès took a hardline pacifist stance, continuing to argue against the 3 years law, and rallied behind them the bulk of anti-war sentiment within the country. The parliamentary left, along with the Republican Federation and the Liberal Action, however, all took the government's side, urging for more preparation as war with Germany seemed inevitable. The parliamentary right faced similar issues to the previous election, where it failed to offer a vision different from the parliamentary left on the leading issue of the day. Now let's see the results. Incredible. The parliamentary left had done it again, winning a 4th term in a row. This time they won 361 seats, their greatest victory yet, which largely came from fears of a change in governance when a war could break out at any moment. The right was hurt hard, for failure to offer an opposing voice caused them to fall down to just 138 seats, which once again would deny them the ability to play a major part in writing up legislation. Alexandre Ribot had led them for 4 straight elections, and they were still unable to make a major breakthrough. Speaking of major breakthrough, such a deed was accomplished by the SFIO party, who managed to win a triple-digit number of seats for the very first time. They had done this from running on a clear pacifist platform, which had rallied anti-war voices from all over the political spectrum behind them, although it wasn't enough to overpower the established coalitions. Following the elections, Poincaré would try a sneaky trick by appointing Alexandre Ribot to the prime ministership, but just 3 days in he lost a confidence vote from a new parliament. Relenting, Poincaré would agree to appoint a member of the left-wing coalition to be prime minister, choosing René Viviani, who had previously served for 4 years as labor minister under Clemenceau and Briand. The new government would not have long to rest, as just 2 weeks after its formation a shockwave would be sent throughout all of Europe. On a visit to Sarajevo in Bosnia, the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife would both be assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. The incident would trigger war between Austria and Serbia, which Russia would join to defend its ally, which would drag France into the war as well. Wanting to support Austria-Hungary, Germany would enter the war too. In a single month of July 1914, the entirety of Europe had gone up into flames. The Great War had begun. Many matches could have been lit to instigate this conflict, and it was this particular one that happened to do it. Domestically in France, chaos would further ensue when on the 31st of July, Jean Jaurès was assassinated by a far-right activist, which would send more shockwaves through the French political world. In such a short time span, France had been dragged into a multi-year global conflict, where one of its most important politicians was left dead. But it was a global conflict France had been preparing for nearly a decade, and she wasn't going to make things easy for the Germans. A new sense of national unity was triggered. Viviani's first cabinet would only last until August, when all the different French political parties came together to form a single coalition, all united in the common purpose of winning the war. The Republican Federation and Liberal Action would officially participate in a government for the very first time, uniting with the rivals they had fought tooth and nail against over the separation battle just a decade ago. The SFIO too, now with Jaurès gone, joined the government for the common purpose of winning the war. This great union wouldn't just be in Parliament, however, as a new cabinet formed by Viviani in August would include them all. Of the major ministries, education, labor, and the interior would be given to the Radical Party. Foreign affairs to the Independent Radicals, commerce to the Democratic Alliance, finance to the Republican Federation, and public works to the SFIO. A new cabinet had been assembled, one that had never been seen in French politics before, a cabinet with a unanimous confidence of all parliaments, one that would work together to achieve a goal they all believed in, victory over the Central Powers. My friends, I hope I can invite you back in the next video to join me for the French World War I experience. See you then.